Hey everyone, Tactics here with my final Advanced Mythic Plus guide of Season 2, where I'll be walking you through a returning dungeon from Battle for Azeroth, the Underrot. In this video, I'll be showing you a plus 23 Tyrannical Bolstering key that we did, discussing how we routed through the dungeons and possible edits you could make to the route as well, how to handle the various bosses, and much more. Just like the other routes in this series, I do not actually recommend using this in pug groups. Instead, it's aimed more at coordinated groups that are looking to push into higher key levels, but I do have a full series of easy to execute routes that are pug friendly if that's something you're interested in over on my channel, which I'll link also down in the description below. Otherwise, let's get started here, where right off the bat, we're doing a kind of smaller pull than we could. So this maggot, if you're interested, you can actually skip it as well with an out of combat CC that is like sap, that kind of thing. In prison, I believe it is a beast as well. So those kind of things can get you by it without invising and without aggroing it. But obviously you can run into issues there if you ever die and want to release. You're then stuck behind this worm. So we pull it in here and we just pull this one pack in the center here with the one matron. So you just have the one kick. What you are worried about is these headhunters and their root. So they can root a player, not with the barbed spear, that's just a random target hit, but they have a root and a dot and hooked snare, and that's going to go out and can be problematic when combined with the matron charge and cleave. Something you can do is you can freedom it off. Any kind of snare break as well works, so keep that in mind if you get that root here. Otherwise, we are watching that maggot here with the rotten bile, and you also see when the enrage goes off, that bile cast is extremely fast. So if you do have a soothe in your group and you do this pull, my recommendation is actually to try and instantly soothe that grub, because that will make sure that the frontal cast doesn't instantly go off, right? It's like a very short cast because of that enrage effect, so keep that in mind. You also, especially on non-bolstering weeks, especially on a tyrannical week where the trash isn't too scary, you could add one of these 3 packs onto this first pull and bloodlust it. We probably should have bloodlusted this anyways. It would have lost some value because of key level. On a higher key level, even on tyrannical, that would be value. On a fort key at this level, it would have been fine. On this key level, just because it is a 23 tyrannical and we have quite a bit of damage, it would have probably been a little bit of a waste. But lusting the first boss is kind of a waste as well, in my opinion, in a lot of groups, especially with a prop paladin, because kicks become so easy. So if you want to do a big pull here, bolstering stopped us, but I believe it's actually the other bridge. The right bridge is padding towards you when you initially start the dungeon, so you can have someone tap that pack and bring it up and do that with this first pull, and that gives you a pretty decent amount of speed, because we're gonna have to sit here with no cooldowns and kind of do this 3 pack on its own. Underrot timer is exceptionally forgiving, which is why we do this on this key level. I think we're still going to 2 chest this 23, even with doing this. But that is something you can do and adjust to make this pull and make this beginning part of the dungeon rather much quicker, and actually give you a very good valued bloodlust by pulling these 3 mobs into that first pull and bloodlusting that. It's pretty value for sure. It's just obviously much more dangerous because you have to get that kick in. You have another headhunter for that hook snare, and then you have another matron for another set of charges and cleave. So there's a lot more going on in that pull, but usually it's it hasn't gone too terribly for us so far in our testing. But otherwise here, yeah, like this took us quite a decent amount of time because we had no cooldowns. Just cleave this pack down, so that's kind of why it's definitely a lot better. But bolstering is a little scary, especially if those matrons get bolstered up. So going in here into this pull, if that Dark Omen is going to get pretty scary on higher fortified keys especially. A lot of the times we found it targets tanks, but if it ever doesn't target the tank, just make sure that person pops some sort of defensive, because it does tick pretty hard here. I mean, even on the tyrannical key, you see that's through a defensive, it's ticking for like an eighth of the dragon's HP through a defensive. On a 23 tyrannical, so you can just imagine, you know, going on a 25 fort key, that's going to hurt a lot. So keep that in mind. Probably really the only major thing you need to have a defensive for in this first area, and that brings you to the first boss here, where as you can see, with a prop paladin, you pretty much never need to actually kick the boss itself. We save all of our kicks basically, except for one floater, which is the Shadow Priest, for the ad. And so if I ever just for some reason don't have a kick available for the boss, we can just call that out, and we have the extra kick available to us. Make sure as a tank you do taunt that effigy because it does have a separate aggro table whenever it spawns, so it is possible for it to go and just smack someone else, so keep that in mind. But otherwise, fairly straightforward boss here, right? Just avoid the rots, keep kicks up. If you don't have a prompt paladin, you just need to have a kick rotation. This comp would be just fine, assuming I was on any tank that wasn't a prop paladin and only had one kick. You just need to be a lot more involved with that kick rotation, and you also need to make sure that you're focusing the ad down. So like here we have a lot of extra boss damage because we don't actually need to put a ton of damage into the ad because we're not going to run out of kicks. However, if we didn't have the prop paladin kicks, we would run out of the kicks at some point. So focusing that ad down so your tank doesn't get bolted repeatedly becomes much more important. Now, one bolt going off is not a problem, and you can actually plan for that as well. Just make sure there's nothing really else for the tank to defensive on this fight. So as long as the tank knows, hey, a bolt or two is going to go off at this moment, and they can pop a defensive for that and a healing CD or whatever, then that's perfectly fine. It's the problem when it's supposed to get kicked and it doesn't, because otherwise there's no tank damage. Like, there's no damage at all in this fight, as you can see. Like, no one's health bar is moving. The healing done is currently all single-digit numbers. So oh, there, now it's above single digits. There it is. But yeah, basically not a very difficult fight if you get the kicks, but you can plan to miss kicks as well if you have if something goes wrong, you overlap kicks, whatever it is. That's not a big deal either way. And we're dashing through here. Never want to pull ticks. Those mobs are banned. I'm going to go through here probably and grab these guys. Let's see if I actually grab. Yeah, I do. So I'm going to grab these guys. You can actually have your party wait behind you a little bit so you don't actually grab these, because we want to run through with these 5 mobs and pull a couple more things. So we're just going to run through here. And it's basically just managing your kicks and stops in this area. You know, kicks or stops for the lashers, kicks or stops for the blood swarmers, stops for the maggots in this area, right? This whole area is just about managing those and pulling as big as you can while still being able to manage them. Now, you're going to see me not actually chain pull very much in this area because of bolstering, but just note that there would be a ton more chain pulling in this area if there wasn't bolstering. Like, as soon as like feral bloodswarmers die, that's kind of the main limiting factor. We want to try and kind of only pull one of those at a time. You see, with a big bolster, we want to make sure we CC it a bunch so it doesn't murder someone, but mostly only pulling one of those at a time. I think the very last pull of this area we pull 2, but we have cooldowns like sack, like a bop assigned for that double blood swarmer pull. Evasion is also very, very good as well, just to make sure those fixates don't get murdered. The other thing here is this pull, if it wasn't bolstering week, we probably would drag it down the hallway to the first worm, and that would basically eliminate a pull after the boss. So that's something you can do. We didn't want to do that because bolstering is definitely going to be slightly problematic if we do that. So we just opted not to do that this week. Again, time optimization to do that, but something that's not really necessary at this key level given our damage. Just play a little bit more safer in this key and just get this area down. And yeah, it's not as efficient, but it'll be much, much safer to do. So keep that in mind. You can chain pull this. I would probably chain pull this on any week that isn't bolstering. But basically here, we're just moving from pack to pack as we're getting them killed. The big thing here, especially if we had pulled this blood swarmer, that would have like given him like 5 bolstering stacks, which is very, very dangerous, right? So kind of why, again, we're not chain pulling in this area and just managing our kicks and stops and only pulling as many things as we can actually keep kicked and stopped. Otherwise, it's going to lead to problems, right? Decaying Mind, notably, if you have some extra disease dispels, it's not a big deal if one goes off here or there, assuming it doesn't go off on the only person that can dispel it, right? Like, we have 3 disease dispels in this group, so it's not a big deal. Though this is Afflicted week as well, so maybe we get caught in an area where we don't actually have a disease dispel available, but, you know, usually it's not the end of the world. You really want to stop that blood swarmer. You really want to make sure that maggot is either stopped or completely avoided, because that cone is going to be very, very lethal at all these key levels. And other than that, you just want to watch the people actually being fixated by the actual swarmers there. Like, we committed a bop there. This is the one double blood swarmer pull. This is actually a pretty big pull here. We're going to add these lashers as well. And so basically this is all AoE stops and some kicks here in this group. And it's, like I said, it's just mostly coordinating your stops and your kicks such that as few things as possible go off. And obviously, again, Prop Paladin does facilitate that a bit more because all these abilities are kickable and stoppable, so the extra shield throwing around can help. But we also have a lot of AoE stops in our group, right? Paladins both have 1 in the blind. Shadow Priest has that fear that you saw. The Dragon has a knock up and a knock back. And then, of course, Rogue has all the single target CCs as well. You have a pretty decent balance here in order to get all these stops. So just keep that in mind. Definitely is going to be harder to do a pull like that in like an uncoordinated group that doesn't have stops planned out or kicks planned out, that kind of thing, right? Keep that in mind. Then we get to Cragmaw. You can see we're nowhere near Lust because 1, we're going pretty fast, and 2, we lusted the boss into the trash pack. On a higher key level, if you had lusted the first trash pack, I actually think you probably would have gotten to this boss and would have lusted maybe a minute or 2 into this boss at worst, but maybe even on pull depending. So that's another point to lust early in the dungeon as opposed to lusting at the first boss. And as you can see here, we pull him up to the rib cage near the side of the room, and everyone is just kind of lined up here, and this makes the charge pretty small. There's also a spot behind where the boss will like cancel charges. That works as well. It's just a lot harder to get to, a lot more time consuming, and honestly, it's not a big deal. This boss is, in my opinion at least, nowhere near as dangerous as it was back in BFA, so it's not a big deal if you spend a little bit more time inefficiently moving here, but basically he charges up against the wall and all these bugs are kind of clustered here. Very easy to have people to step on. 1's going to get there. I don't actually go to step on that because this frontal is about to come out. I don't want to cleave anybody, but we get 1 tick. Ticks are actually pretty dangerous. Even 1 tick can be dangerous, so that's kind of when tanks want to make sure they have something to deal with the stacking debuff the ticks put on you. The frontal, I believe, can still be dodged if you're very quick, but honestly, I don't think it's scary enough to warrant trying to dodge. I think as long as you have some sort of defensive available for every single frontal, you'll be just fine. Obviously, some tank specs, and that's 4 stacks of the bleed, by the way. That's how much 1 singular tick hurts on 23. So very scary. You want to make sure you avoid that. And then after the second charge, you can see the tantrum is coming up. So I'm going to be moving towards the center of the room, right? Because you want to always try and make this boss kind of move as little as possible, because otherwise he'll just hard sprint to the middle of the room and then start tantruming. Not ideal. So by pre-moving to the middle here, that gives us a lot more time, a lot more space to run and catch everything here. So that's why we do that. Pre-move a little bit, and then tantrum is going to start, and we're going to be able to just spread out and get all of these worms. And then basically just a rinse and repeat here. Now note that the charge timing does kind of desync from the tantrum timing. Actually, all of his abilities kind of desync. So the phases aren't equal, which is a little bit weird. And so like what you're going to see is he's going to basically like insta-charge, or charge very quickly, rather, not insta-charge, out of this intermission phase here, which is why we don't try and go to the actual bones. Kind of stay out here. He charges. And we're just going to kind of reset here into the middle, pick up all these things. And we're just going to be right here because he's about to indigestion again. And this is another one he's going to do 2 charges. But eventually the boss kind of desyncs to a point where he only charges like 1 time in the entire phase. I think sometimes he even frontals first. It's just like a weird desync. So make sure you have an eye on timers for this boss, because it can get a little weird in terms of like when he's charging, when he's frontaling, that kind of thing. And make sure you're staying on top of actually getting all these bugs. That, again, you saw that 1 bug give me a lot of trouble here at the beginning of this fight. So if you have a lot of bug spawn, it's definitely going to be a bit of an issue here. And I'm just bringing back basically to reduce the amount of movement for range, because we have a pretty range heavy comp as well. So using this cage constantly is pretty good for a melee heavy comp, but because we have 2 range DPS and a melee DPS that has long arms, having the boss kind of charge out like this isn't the end of the world. But if you have the ability to, you know, do the movement or whatever and get back to this spot, especially if your whole group is melee and is fine walking with you with the boss, that's fine, do that. But basically we have a couple casters and they don't necessarily want to constantly be moving. See here, the boss ended up near the bones, so we go near the bones. That's perfectly fine. We're going to reset here and do the stuff here. 1 more charge, then a tantrum. But as you see, now this charge is going to go out and he's going to tantrum like very immediately after almost. Way less time than the first phase, for example, where he charged, we got all the bugs, and then we moved to the middle of the room, and then he tantrums. He charges, boom, he's going to tantrum. Very quick. You don't even have time to pick up all these bugs before the tantrum starts. So this timing is just going to get worse and worse as the boss fight goes out, so keep that in mind. But in general, the big thing here is just stay safe during the tantrum and get all the bugs. Don't worry about your boss uptime. It's not going to be great. It is what it is. Get all the bugs, because that's really the only thing that can wipe you on this boss fight. Now, moving past here, I got the one trash pull right at the boss, which I said you could probably do earlier. What we do is we have me as the prop paladin kind of assigned to this horror here, and just chain kicking the horror, chain kicking the horror. Again, I'll call if I need help, and we've got a stop for the death speaker here. I recommend having either an interrupt or a big stun on that scary dark echoes cast there, just because getting a tick off is kind of, it deals a big chunk of damage, right? Especially on fortified weeks. You're gonna see later on, actually, I don't do that. I save an Avenger Shield kick for it, and because the cast is so fast, one tick does hit the entire party. It doesn't kill us, but something to keep in mind. That's why you tend to want to save your actual interrupt if you can for the Dark Echoes cast. But run along the side here. Gonna chain pull these defilers in with the Death Speaker here. And very, very important here to make sure you have assigned kicks. I think this might be another one where we maybe miss a kick, and there's obviously afflicted going out, so there's a lot going out here. But basically, want to make sure that we get kicks. So we had to stop, but it was a little badly there, so I end up using my kick for that. And I think that ends up meaning we get a couple ticks of a curse to go out in just a second here. Yeah, so we do get some curse ticks going out there, which isn't ideal. But this is a pretty heavy pull. So what we do is I would recommend having 2 people assigned to each of the big mobs, and then 1 person assigned to stop the actual caster ad, the fallen guy here, with the Wicked Frenzy. So stop Wicked Frenzy, don't commit a kick to it like I did there, and instead use all of your kicks on 2 defilers, 2 people assigned to each defiler, kicking first and second, and that will give you no curse, ideally, and we'll just make this a lot safer. So this one got a little bit scuffed because of the kicks, and I think our kicks are going to overlap slightly here again as well. But it's not the end of the world, as you can see. Like, we're still perfectly fine. We get the kicks, not the end of the world. I believe I'm holding here. Yeah, this is the one that goes off a little bit because we overlapped kicks here as well. So I end up getting to Avenger Shield. Luckily, I got a quick Avenger Shield proc to get rid of that. But again, ideally, assign your kicks, stick to them, and make sure you're using a stop on the actual caster guy, the Bloodsworn, not the Bloodsworn Defiler, the caster guy in this bone pack, as opposed to kicking that, because usually you're not gonna have the kicks, right? Not ideal for sure. I guess technically we could have used like the Shadow Priest kick, but having a backup kick is always super nice if you do have an overlap on those guardians, because otherwise eating a full channel of a curse is just really feels bad, because you used a kick on the other caster that you could have stopped, right? So here, coming to Spore Crawler, our Lust is just coming up, so we pop Lust here. We like to play on the outside of the room here, and a big portion of this fight is kind of maximizing the amount of mushrooms you hit with your Shockwave. So you can see here, I'm kind of lining up, hitting as many as I can, and there's 2 here. Hitting these with a Shockwave is going to be pretty low value, so you're going to probably see, yeah, I'm going to step on them, I'm going to Dispel myself, I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to move over here to this big pack. Actually, no, I'm going to plan to move over there to the big pack, see the rogue actually go out there with the shockwaves, and then turn around and get this pack behind us because the rogue got all this pack. So adapting to the upheaval placements and where you're putting your shockwave is very important, because you want to get as many of these mushrooms as you can, so you have to soak as few as possible, because the festering harvest going out with any mushrooms up is extremely painful, especially on a higher tyrannical key. So the goal here every single phase is to make sure there are no mushrooms up, and always it is worthwhile, assuming they don't die, for a single player to eat some mushrooms. As you can see out here, we got a couple mushrooms, then to have those mushrooms detonate and go on the entire party. Always want to make sure someone soaks. Our comp is pretty good for that because we have 3 immunes, right? We have Cloak, we have Bubble, we have My Bubble as well, and Spell Warding as well, so 4 immunes, and then Dispersion, which isn't an immune, but very big DR. So all of those things, very good for soaking mushrooms, and basically the fight is just repetitive from here. Something you can do is, when there's no more shockwaves left, you can slightly inch the boss towards the middle, just a tap, a step or two, like here, and that makes dodging all these swirls, or balls rather, a little easier. See, I got 2 stacks here. It's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit easier to dodge if you aren't right next to a mushroom on the edge of the room. Obviously, our dispels are a bit light on this fight because there's afflicted going out as well, so we have to make sure we have dispels available to deal with them. So we can't just constantly be dispelling mushroom stacks off. Otherwise, we probably would be soaking quite a bit, both me and the Holy Paladin, just because Holy Paladins are pretty thick. It's not a big deal. And because, if you ever just miss 1 or 2 here, And seeing, looking how I'm getting this angle, trying to get as many as possible. And ideally all of these, right? And there's an okay one here. This is also an okay upheaval, but I can make this angle maybe a little bit better by turning the boss, inching him a little bit closer. You don't want him to be inside this mushroom, but with this positioning here, he should hit these ones and the ones behind me as well. So it's just all about getting that right angle with the shockwave. There it is, boom. All the mushrooms gone. There's literally a single mushroom up. I think I'm gonna try and run over there, and then the Holy Paladin beats me to it. But that's always what you want to do. You always want to make sure, hey, there's one mushroom up. Do you want this disease to go on the entire party? Probably not, right? So one person running out there and then getting into dispelled means that no one else needs to get a dot at all. And this Festering Harvest hit doesn't tickle either, so keep that in mind. Like, that's a pretty big hit. So that person that does soak, if you soak really late like the Paladin did, might need some healing love. He obviously instantly topped himself, so it's not a big deal. But just keep that in mind there. Otherwise, like I said, this fight just kind of repeats, so there's not too much to talk about there. Just keep on top of those mushrooms and you'll be in a spot. Moving out here, we do Mind Soothe. So these Faceless Corruptors are actually humanoids for some reason. So we Mind Soothe and hug left a little bit here. And what we actually do is we will bring this Defiler into this next pull here. So again, 2 kicks on the Defiler, a stop ideally on the Death Speaker, and then as the Paladin here, I'm going to be soloing the Worm. And again, this is the spot I believe where I use my kick initially walking in, so I have to use an Avenger Shield here on this guy, and it goes a little bit too quick for me. So that's ideally where you'd want to save your kick for the Dark Echoes because it's off the GCD. But no, otherwise it's not a big deal. With bolstering, we don't chain pull, but otherwise we would kill this horror and then we would chain pull into the pack behind us, which is going to be just, it's basically just going to be a 2-pack again. Another way where you could just save time by chain pulling here, because it's bolstering week, we decided to go safe. We're doing this 2-pack here. Can be very hard to see, of course, the direction these guys, these Faceless Corruptors, are facing. Some neat tip, if you have the count already, in this next pull actually, which is the double Corruptor plus Worm, you can actually mind control the Worm here as you're going into the pack. If you have Dominate Mind on your Priest, they can actually just take the Worm, and then if killing these 2 guys gives you count, the door will open up, and then when you teleport down, the Worm will just snap back. It stays up here essentially. You won't be stuck in combat or anything like that. So neat tip, if you don't need the count from this Worm, we do need the count from this Worm in our route, so we just need to be careful. These Maddening Gazes will definitely get people. It can be hard to see where the front, where the back is sometimes, so be careful. Same with the tentacles, right? They spawn. Sometimes it's hard to see how big the tentacle radius hit is going to be. Sometimes hard to see where the front of the tentacles is, like these are faced in here, but it's hard to see, right? So be very, very careful. Over move probably, just to make sure that you don't get hit by those, and just kind of stay safe here and get these guys down. Again, pretty safe pull here, but not really too much you can really add to it. Then we're going downstairs, starting the boss relatively quickly here. And the main goal here is just making sure you guys stay together for the cleanses. Obviously, a Priest, again, pretty useful here. Kind of weaving in mass dispels between cleansing light casts to just keep stacks very, very low for the entire party. As you can see here, we're going to be baiting these explosions in one direction, stepping through the boss a little bit. Watch, because a lot of times he'll drop puddles like right underneath himself or even a little close, so be careful trying not to get hit by those. I'm then going to pull the boss a little bit away and stack him right back up next to those puddles we just made and do the same thing. So we're going to be constantly shooting these puddles back over on top of each other to kind of condense all of the orbs that spawn behind us. For us, we have our rogue mainly as killing the orbs. He uses them to funnel into the boss. Obviously, some things like shields from Divine Toll are going to be hitting things. Other people have AoEs that will likely be hitting things as well, but no one is really focused on killing the spores in our group, because the rogue gains single target damage by using the spores to funnel into the boss. So that's what we do for our group. And again, this is just us going around the entire room like this. There's not much else to it. Something to keep in mind is just making sure your group is moving as a unit. So for example, if you get a circle during one of those frontals, you're going to see us move along together during this, so just to make sure that people still get dispelled. The boom, it goes, and then we move. Don't move too early. You have lots of time. Similarly, if it happens and we have to move with the actual circle, we'll all move and ideally together. The only person that doesn't is me. It's not a big deal if I miss a dispel here or there, just because tank damage is pretty low in this fight. Like, you're gonna see, I'm just gonna like hard walk away from this. Not a big deal that I get. And I have enough defensives. I'm in Sentinel right now, and just making sure the boss actually gets in the correct position. Fairly important, so more important in my opinion than getting one dispel off. And as you saw there, I think I got actually individual dispelled by the healer, because again, this is a magic debuff, so it can be magic dispelled. You need to be aware of all these afflicted as well, but we have a bunch of extra dispels, so basically the healer in this situation is freed up to use their dispel on players, and everyone else is going to be watching those afflicted. Otherwise, just kind of rotate around in a circle here. Not too much to it. We do focus the very last ad that spawns, not the next set. Basically, the helper guy here, he's going to kill all the ads for you, so it's not really a big deal. You never need to swap to them. It's actually DPS loss. Except the third set of ads, you want to swap to the ad that he doesn't initially run to, because that does make it a little bit faster. Maybe a couple seconds faster if you actually kill it before he gets there. If he's being slow, which has happened sometimes, it's a decent chunk faster, but just keep that in mind. So something you can do to make it just a little bit faster. But there we have it, guys. Hopefully this does help you out, and if it does, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it, including maybe soon a series looking at some very high key routes with TGP coming out. If you're looking to push for the 0.1% title, gonna have a bunch of maybe like 25 plus key level routes for you guys, so maybe that's interesting for you. If you have any questions about this dungeon, though, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, or you can come ask me over on my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I stream all of my push keys. Recently been whipping out the Guardian Druid a fair bit, so that's been fun. Come drop by, say hi. Of course, big thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon. It really does mean a lot. Otherwise, thanks everyone else so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.